On the morning of my 68th birthday, I expected nothing more than silence. At this age, celebrations had become quiet things if they happened at all. Most of my family had drifted far away, some by choice, others by betrayal. I was used to the loneliness, the stillness of my house, and the simple ritual of pouring myself black coffee and staring out the window at the gray horizon. But that morning, there was something waiting on my doorstep that shattered the monotony, something that felt like the opening act of a story I never knew I'd be forced to play a role in. It was a package, not large, not small, a perfectly ordinary cardboard box wrapped in plain brown paper, with no return address, no stamps, no markings that hinted at where it had come from. The only thing written on it was my full name, in handwriting I hadn't seen for over 40 years. For a moment I froze. My heart, already weakened by age, skipped a painful beat. That handwriting belonged to a man who was long dead, or at least I had believed him to be. A man who had once been my closest friend, until betrayal turned him into my bitterest enemy. His name was Victor Hale, and the last time I saw him I swore I'd bury every memory of him for good. But here it was, sitting innocently at my door, as if it had been waiting decades just to return. I brought the package inside with trembling hands, my coffee forgotten on the table. For several minutes I only stared at it, debating whether to open it or call someone. But who would I call? My son hadn't spoken to me in years, my daughter had her own life far across. The ocean, and the few acquaintances I still had, would laugh off my paranoia. So I opened it alone. Inside was an old wooden box carved with intricate patterns I recognized instantly, because they matched the designs etched on a dagger Victor once carried everywhere. The dagger of our youth, back when we thought ourselves kings of the world, untouchable, unbreakable. My throat tightened as I lifted the box from its cardboard shell. It was heavier than it looked, cold even through my wrinkled fingers. When I opened the lid, I expected the dagger itself, but what I found was far stranger. A single photograph. It showed me younger, perhaps in my late 20s. I was standing beside Victor in front of a crumbling farmhouse, both of us smiling the kind of smile that belongs to men who think the future is theirs for the taking. But someone had taken a knife and scratched deep lines across my face in the photo, leaving Victor's untouched. Beneath the photograph was a folded letter. My hands shook as I opened it. The paper smelled faintly of smoke, as though it had been pulled from some half-burned ruin. The letter read, "For 68 years you thought time would protect you. You thought betrayal could be buried. You were wrong. The past never dies. It only waits. This is your invitation. Follow the trail or watch everything you've built crumble piece by piece. Begin where it all ended. You know the place. No signature. None was needed. My breath caught as memories assaulted me. Memories I had buried beneath years of silence, where it all ended. I knew exactly where that meant. The farmhouse in the photograph. The place where Victor and I had parted ways, where blood was spilled, and where secrets were locked away in the dust of time. The problem was, that farmhouse had burned to the ground in 1982. Nothing should remain there. Yet I couldn't shake the sense that someone, maybe Victor himself if he had survived what I believed, was pulling strings from the shadows, dragging me back into a nightmare I had narrowly escaped. I should have thrown it all away. I should have burned the letter, tossed the box, and returned to my silent life. But as I sat there staring at the carved wood and the scarred photograph, something inside me stirred. Something I hadn't felt in decades. Rage, the kind that coils deep in your chest and refuses to be ignored. Whoever had sent this, they wanted me unsettled, fearful, maybe even broken. But I wasn't broken yet. If the past had come back for me, then I would face it on my own terms. I decided then and there I would follow the trail, not because they commanded me to, but because I needed to know who was behind this and why now, after so many years. That night, as I tried to sleep, I couldn't escape the feeling that eyes were on me. Shadows in the corners of my room seemed darker than usual, and every creak of the house set my nerves on fire. I kept the wooden box on my bedside table, unable to put it out of sight. It felt alive somehow, as though the dagger it once carried still whispered through the carved lines. I thought about Victor's face, his grin, his sharp eyes, the way he used to speak about destiny as if it were a game only we understood. And then I remembered the night everything collapsed, the night that farmhouse turned into a graveyard of promises. I hadn't told anyone what truly happened there. Not my family, not my wife when she was still alive, not even myself when I tried to lie awake, convincing myself I'd forgotten. But now, the past was demanding to be remembered. On the morning after my 68th birthday, I packed a small bag, placed the photograph, and let her inside and locked my front door as if I might never see it again. I was going back to the ashes, back to the place where betrayal first bled me dry. And as I drove away, one thought burned brighter than all others. Whoever had sent me that box, they were about to regret it. When I placed the box aside, I noticed something resting beneath the satin lining. A plain white envelope, tucked so discreetly it could have been overlooked. My name was written on it in a hand I hadn't seen in decades, long, deliberate, strokes, each letter formed with an elegance only one man ever used. My hands trembled as I reached for it. The world seemed to quiet, the laughter of the television downstairs fading into a low hum. I slid my finger under the seal and tore it open with care, half expecting the paper inside to dissolve like smoke. The letter began simply, to the one who never truly forgot. I froze. The words were unsettling, intimate in a way that stirred something buried deep inside me. I read on, each line pressing like a fingerprint against my memory. Whoever had written this knew me better than most ever had. It wasn't just a letter. It was a callback to a part of my life I had long tried to bury. A past I had silenced with years of careful avoidance. The writer spoke of debts unpaid, of wrongs unrighted, and of promises broken by cowardice. The sentences weren't accusations, not directly. They were sharper, designed to sting not because they shouted, but because they whispered truths I had spent a lifetime denying. By the time I reached the end, my palms were damp. The last line was the cruelest of all: meet me where it ended, or live knowing that the past will come to finish what it started, where it ended. My chest tightened. Only one place fit that description: the old railway bridge on the edge of town where I had last seen him before everything unraveled. That night had never left me. It replayed in fragments during sleepless hours. The argument, the rain, the final words shouted against the storm, and the silence that followed, broken only by the rushing river below. The envelope had no return address, no signature, but it didn't need one. I already knew who it was from, though it should have been impossible. He was dead. I had stood at his funeral, or at least what was left of one, and yet here was his handwriting, his tone, his secrets buried in ink that only he could have carved onto paper. I stumbled to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and tried to steady my thoughts. Maybe it was a trick. Maybe someone had gotten hold of old letters and was playing a cruel game. But then my eyes fell on the box again. Inside, beside the note, lay a pocket watch. Not just any watch, his watch. The one I had given him on the night everything began. The night I'd hoped would bind us together, but instead tore us apart. I lifted it with shaking hands, the chain cold as frost. When I pressed the side, the case clicked open. Inside, the inscription was still there, as sharp as the day I had etched it. Time is ours. A bitter laugh escaped me. Ours? Time had stolen everything, or so I believed. The question clawed at me. Who could have placed this here? Who had the power to unearth what was long dead and place it in my hands on my birthday? And more importantly, why now? Sleep abandoned me that night. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind seemed to whisper that someone was watching. By dawn, I was already dressed, the letter folded neatly in my pocket, the watch hanging heavy in my coat. I didn't want to go to the bridge. I knew what waited there wasn't comfort. It was truth, and truth was always dangerous, but I had no choice. The past had come knocking, and it would not leave until I answered. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I shut my eyes, the image of that box crept into my mind. The smell of the old wood, the cold bite of the brass latch, the sound of the lid snapping shut. It haunted me. And then, of course, there was the note. A note with handwriting that had no business existing in this world anymore. I stared at it again in the dim light of dawn, my hands trembling as I traced the loops and strokes. That handwriting was burned into my memory decades ago. It belonged to only one person, Henry Mallory. My childhood friend, my brother in all but blood. The man who vanished from my life nearly 50 years ago without a word. Henry had been gone for so long that most people I knew had forgotten he ever existed. But not me. He was the boy who saved me from drowning in the lake behind the mill. He was the one who taught me how to fight back against the older kids who pushed me around. He was the man who stood beside me at my wedding, his smile wider than my own. And then, gone. No explanation. No goodbye. Just gone. For years, I tried to track him down. Letters, phone calls, dead ends. And eventually, I forced myself to stop looking, to bury the ache of betrayal under layers of life, work, and family. But now, here it was. His handwriting written as though he had penned it yesterday. The note itself was maddeningly short. Only 4 words, "I never left you." That was it. No signature, no explanation, nothing. But those words cut deeper than any blade. The strangest part wasn't the message itself. It was the ink. The letters shimmered faintly, like they had been written in something other than ordinary ink. In the faint morning light, they glowed just enough to unsettle me. I rubbed my thumb across the letters, expecting smudges, but the ink was smooth, as if it had seeped into the fibers of the paper itself. I felt a chill crawl across my skin. This was no ordinary note. I shoved the letter back into the box and locked it in the bottom drawer of my desk, but that did nothing to silence the storm raging in my head. Why now? Why after 50 years? And who had delivered it? By midday, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed the note into my coat pocket and drove into town, heading straight for the one place I swore I'd never step foot in again. The archives of the old county library. If Henry was reaching out from beyond the grave, or worse, if someone was using his memory to torment me, then I needed answers. The archivist, a frail woman with glasses perched on the tip of her nose, squinted at the paper when I placed it on the counter. She tilted her head, then frowned. "This is strange," she murmured. "Do you see how the ink catches the light? Almost metallic." I nodded. "Do you recognize it? The style? The ink? Anything?" She shook her head slowly. "I've seen thousands of documents. This isn't like any ink I've handled. And the paper? Look at the fibers. It's not from the last few decades. This is old. Very old." My chest tightened. "How old?" Her lips pressed together before she whispered, 18th century. Maybe earlier. But the handwriting style isn't that old. Whoever wrote this combined 2 different eras, which makes no sense. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. The 18th century? Impossible. Henry was born in 1942. I left the library in a haze, gripping the note like it was a lifeline and a curse all at once. As I walked back to my car, I caught sight of something in the reflection. Of the glass window, someone standing across the street, watching me. It was just a shadow at first, but when my eyes focused, I saw him clearly. Tall, thin, wearing a dark coat, his face obscured by the brim of a hat. He stood utterly still, his head tilted slightly toward me, like a predator studying its prey. The moment I blinked, he was gone. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew this wasn't the last time I would see him. The days following that strange phone call were heavy with silence, yet beneath it ran a current of dread I couldn't shake. The black box still sat on the table in my living room as if mocking me. I hadn't opened it again, but its presence haunted me with every glance. Every time I crossed the room, my eyes drifted to it, and a chill prickled the back of my neck. I couldn't decide whether I wanted to burn it, bury it, or keep it close in case it revealed more secrets. On the evening of the 5th day, the atmosphere in my house changed. It wasn't something obvious. No broken window, no creaking door. It was a shift, subtle and unnerving, like a storm cloud drifting over the horizon. I was in the kitchen, brewing a cup of tea to calm my nerves when I heard the faintest click. The kind of sound a door makes when it's carefully closed by someone who doesn't want to be heard. My heart stopped. I hadn't touched the front door. For a moment, I thought I imagined it. My hands trembled as I set the kettle down. Then footsteps, soft, deliberate, and steady, crossed the hallway floorboards. They weren't mine. Someone else was in the house. I froze, listening, forcing myself to count the seconds between each creak. Whoever it was, they moved with unsettling confidence, as if they knew the layout of my home. Slowly, I reached into the drawer and pulled out the old kitchen knife I kept there. The metal felt cold and heavy in my palm. My breath came shallow, barely daring to move my chest. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound firm, but my voice betrayed me with a tremor. Silence. Then, from the living room, the sound of something sliding across wood, the black box. I gripped the knife tighter, inching toward the sound. My mind raced. Whoever was here wasn't after valuables. They wanted the box. When I stepped into the living room, my stomach lurched. A tall man, dressed entirely in black, stood by the table. His face was obscured by a dark hood, and in his gloved hands he held the box. He turned it over slowly, like he was studying it, inspecting every detail. The way he touched it was reverent, almost ritualistic. "Put that down," I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't move. Instead, he tilted his head slightly as though acknowledging me, but without offering compliance. Then he spoke, his voice low, gravelly, and strangely calm. "You shouldn't have opened it." My skin prickled. "What is this? Who are you?" He set the box back on the table with deliberate care and finally looked up. Though the hood shadowed his face, I caught a glimpse of pale, scarred skin and piercing eyes that seemed to burn in the dim light. "It's not about who I am," he said. "It's about what you've inherited, and what it means for you." My grip on the knife tightened. Inherited? It was a box. A sick joke, that's all. He let out a humorless laugh, the kind that made my stomach twist. "If it were a joke, I wouldn't be here." Before I could respond, he stepped forward, not fast, not threatening, yet his presence was suffocating. I instinctively raised the knife, but he stopped, just out of reach. "You've already started the game," he murmured. "There's no undoing it now." My pulse hammered in my ears. "Game? What game?" He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper that chilled me to the bone. "The kind where you either uncover the truth, or the truth consumes you." With that, he turned abruptly, heading for the front door as if he owned the place. Panic surged through me. I wasn't about to let a stranger break in, terrify me, and then stroll away like nothing had happened. I lunged forward, grabbing his arm with my free hand. But the moment my fingers touched his sleeve, a burning sensation shot through my skin. I yelped, recoiling, and watched in horror as faint red welts bloomed across my palm. He didn't even flinch. He just glanced at me with a look that was both pity and warning. "Careful," he said softly. "Some things are cursed for a reason." And then he was gone. The front door closed behind him with a quiet click, leaving me shaking. In the middle of the room, knife still trembling in my grip, I stumbled to the couch and collapsed, staring at the black box. It hadn't moved. It sat there, silent, innocent, as though none of this had just happened. But the burns on my hand told me it was real. That man was real, and his words echoed relentlessly in my mind. "You've already started the game." I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every rustle of wind outside kept me on edge. My thoughts spiraled. Who was that man? How did he get into my home without a sound? And more importantly, why did it feel like he wasn't just a stranger, but someone tied to me, to my past, in a way I couldn't yet understand? By dawn, exhaustion pulled at my eyes, but fear kept me wide awake. I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't ignore this any longer. That box wasn't just some bizarre gift. It was a key, a doorway, to something dangerous. And whether I wanted to or not, I had already stepped through. The photograph lay on my desk for hours, its edges curling slightly as if it carried the weight of decades. I couldn't take my eyes off it. The man in the picture stared back at me with a coldness that unsettled my chest, as though he had been waiting all these years for me to see him again. His face was older, hardened by time, but there was no mistaking it. That cruel smile, those dark, piercing eyes, it was him, the one who destroyed everything. For years, I had convinced myself that he was gone from my life forever, swept away into the dark corners of memory. But here he was, resurfacing in the form of a photograph placed carefully inside a mysterious box. Someone had gone through the trouble of finding him, capturing this image, and delivering it to me on my birthday. Whoever had done this knew exactly what they were stirring up inside me. My hands trembled as I flipped the picture over. On the back, scrawled in uneven handwriting, was a single word: soon. That word was like a spark dropped into a pool of gasoline. It ignited something in me I had buried for decades. Old wounds reopened, and a surge of anger pulsed through my veins. Suddenly, I wasn't a frail 68-year-old sitting in a quiet study. I was that young man again, standing helplessly in the ruins of a life he had torn apart. But now I was older, wiser, and far more dangerous. I poured myself a drink, my mind racing. Who sent this to me? Was it a threat, a warning, or was it a gift? A push toward something I had long avoided but never truly forgotten. The man in the photograph wasn't just a ghost from my past. He was the architect of my suffering. And if fate had decided to bring him back into my orbit, then perhaps it was time for me to settle the score. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the box, the photograph, the word etched in ink. My mind replayed the night it all began, the betrayal that set me on this lonely path. His laughter had haunted me ever since, echoing in the back of my skull. I turned in bed, restless, until finally I rose before dawn. I sat at my desk again, staring at the photograph as the first rays of sunlight bled through the curtains. This wasn't a coincidence, this was a message. And messages are meant to be answered. By the time the clock struck 7, I had already opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitant at first, before I began typing his name. It had been decades, but men like him don't just vanish. They linger, hiding in shadows, thriving off the misery they created. It didn't take long. His name appeared on a handful of articles, tucked away in obscure corners of the internet. He had built a life for himself, one that seemed untouched by guilt or consequence. There were whispers of wealth, power, and connections that stretched further than I ever imagined. He was not only alive, he was thriving, and that realization stung worse than any blade could. But then I noticed something odd. Each article seemed deliberately vague, as though someone had worked hard to keep his trail hidden. No photos, no clear details, except this one, the photograph I now held in my hand. Whoever sent it to me had access to him, close enough to capture him in this moment, which meant I wasn't alone. Someone out there wanted me to see this. Someone wanted me to act. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking beneath me, and closed my eyes. I could almost hear the ticking of the clock blending with the sound of my heartbeat. I felt the old anger mixing with something else, curiosity. If this was a game, then I was determined to learn the rules. Later that afternoon, I decided to take a walk. The city was bustling, strangers moving past each other with vacant expressions, everyone lost in their own world. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed longer than it should, every step behind me a little too close. I turned suddenly once, twice, but saw nothing but ordinary faces. Still, my instincts told me this was no mere paranoia. The gift, the photograph, the word soon, none of it was random. As I passed a small cafe, I felt an odd pull, an urge to step inside. Maybe it was nothing, maybe it was everything. The warm scent of coffee hit me as I entered, the bell above the door ringing softly. I took a seat near the back, my eyes scanning the room. People chatted, laughed, stirred their cups, and then I saw it, another envelope. It was placed neatly on the table, waiting for me. No one claimed it. No one looked in my direction. My pulse quickened as I reached out with a hesitant hand. Inside was a short note, written in the same uneven handwriting as the word on the photograph. It read, "He doesn't know. Not yet. Watch carefully." My breath caught. Whoever was behind this was leading me down a path, breadcrumb by breadcrumb. They wanted me to see him, to know he was still out there, but also to be patient, to wait. But waiting had never been my strength. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my pocket. My mind was a whirlwind of questions. Who was this messenger? An ally? A stranger with their own vendetta? Or was this another cruel trick, designed to pull me deeper into a trap? Still, I couldn't deny what was happening. My quiet, predictable life had been shattered in just 2 days. I had been pushed back into the world I thought I'd left behind, the world of secrets, betrayal, and revenge. As I left the cafe, I clutched the envelope tightly in my coat pocket. The city around me seemed different now, sharper, more alive. The air carried a sense of electricity, as though the streets themselves knew what was coming. And so did I. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. For the first time in years, I felt the fire inside me roar back to life, and I whispered to myself, a vow I hadn't dared to make until that moment: I will finish what you started, one way or another. I spent the next morning wandering around my house like a man half asleep, replaying every detail of that midnight discovery in my head. The box, the locket, the initials carved inside, the faded letter. It all felt like the opening act of a story I had never agreed to take part in, and yet here I was, dragged into its grip with no chance of escape. The locket now sat on my desk, its surface glinting whenever the morning sun filtered through the blinds. I couldn't look at it for too long without feeling like it was staring, back at me, like an unblinking eye waiting for me to uncover its truth. I reached for it, turned it over in my palm, and tried to imagine the woman who once wore it.
Who was E.M.?
Why had her name resurfaced after decades of silence? And why deliver this to me now, on my 68th birthday, as if time itself had been waiting for this exact moment? I dialed a few numbers that morning. Old friends, people who might still remember the darker corners of our town's past. Most were gone, moved away, or buried. The ones who picked up gave me only fragments. I remember an Emily, quiet girl, kept to herself. Or didn't her family leave suddenly? Nobody saw her after 78. Their words were like puzzle pieces, but they belonged to different puzzles altogether. Nothing fit. It was later, while sifting through the letter again, that I noticed something I had missed before. At the very bottom of the page, barely legible under the faded ink, was what looked like a signature. But it wasn't a name. It was a symbol. A small, crude sketch of a raven in flight. The sight of it made my chest tighten. My family knew that symbol well. It wasn't random. It wasn't decorative. It was a mark used by a man I had spent my entire life trying to forget. Victor Harland. Even saying his name in my mind sent a cold shiver down my spine. He had been the shadow of my youth, a man who thrived on control and cruelty. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. One look from him was enough to remind everyone of their place. And that raven symbol, that crude little drawing, had been his calling card. He signed notes with it, carved it into trees near his property, branded it onto the memories of anyone unlucky enough to cross him. For decades I thought he was gone. Dead, maybe, but now his ghost had flown straight back into my life. The locket and letter weren't just a gift, they were a reminder, a summons. That night I barely slept. I kept hearing sounds in the house, floorboards creaking, the faint whisper of wind brushing against the windows, or maybe something more. I told myself it was nothing, just nerves, but deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, watching. The following day, I drove to the old district library. If there was one place that still held traces of the past, it was there. I asked the librarian, an elderly woman with silver hair pinned neatly back, for newspapers from the late 70s. After some curious glances, she rolled out the archive reels. Hours passed as I cranked through faded headlines, small-town politics, school events, local tragedies. Then, buried between reports of a summer festival and a church renovation, I found it. An article about a young woman gone missing. Emily Morton, 17 years old, vanished without a trace in July 1978. The article noted that she had been seen last near the Harlan property. No suspects, no arrests, no answers. My throat tightened. Morton, E.M., the initials in the locket. It was hers. I sat there, staring at the blurry photograph printed in the article. A girl with long, dark hair and solemn eyes, barely smiling for the camera. She looked fragile, almost too quiet for the noisy world she lived in. But behind those eyes was something else, something secret, something unsaid. And somehow, decades later, her story had clawed its way back into the light and landed squarely in my hands. As I left the library, clutching a copy of the article, I noticed a car idling across the street. A black sedan, windows tinted too dark for me to see inside. I paused on the steps, my instincts screaming. For a long moment the car didn't move. Then, as if realizing I had spotted it, the engine hummed louder and the vehicle glided down the street, disappearing around the corner. Coincidence? Maybe. But after everything, I doubted it. Back at home, I locked the doors and closed the curtains. I poured myself a drink to steady my nerves, but even that didn't help. The questions circled endlessly. Why was I being dragged into Emily's story after all these years? What role had Victor Harlan played? And most terrifying of all, was someone trying to finish a job that had started back in 1978? That night, just before midnight, I heard it again. A sound outside my window. Not the wind this time. Not the house settling. It was sharper, deliberate. I edged closer, heart pounding, and saw it. On the windowsill lay a single black feather, and just like that, I knew this wasn't over. In fact, it was only the beginning. The next morning, I awoke to a strange stillness, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl because it feels manufactured, as though the world itself had muted just for you. I lingered in bed, staring at the ceiling, piecing together the fragments of last night, the second. envelope, the photograph, and the letter's chilling reminder that my past wasn't done with me. I rose and shuffled toward the kitchen, where the bitter comfort of coffee usually steadied my nerves. But today, even the familiar hiss of the kettle couldn't shake off the unease that had wormed its way into my bones. When I peered out the window, I noticed a car parked across the street. Black tinted windows, engine off, but it hadn't been there yesterday. At first, I told myself it was coincidence, maybe a neighbor's guest, maybe someone who worked nearby. But the longer I stood there, the more wrong it felt. The car was angled perfectly toward my house, as though whoever sat inside had been waiting for me to appear. I decided to test it. I opened my front door slowly, pretending to grab the morning newspaper, though I'd stopped subscribing years ago. I bent down, picked up a scrap of mail left on the step, and lifted, my gaze just enough to see if there was movement inside the car. Nothing. No door cracked open, no window rolled down, no figure shifting behind the glass. But the weight of eyes on me was unmistakable. I slammed the door shut and pressed my back against it, heart hammering. "You're being paranoid," I whispered aloud. "You're letting this game get in your head." But deep down, I knew paranoia wasn't always baseless. It was survival instinct. I tried to distract myself by cleaning the house, sweeping the hallways, and reorganizing the bookshelves in my study. Yet every task circled back to the same intrusive thought: someone was watching me. Around noon, I gave in and parted the curtains again. The car was still there. I clenched my fists. If this was part of the sender's plan, they were winning. They wanted me off balance, to see ghosts in every shadow, to lose trust in the safety of my own home. Well, I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. At least, that's what I told myself. By evening, when the car remained stationed outside, I broke. I grabbed my coat and marched out, locking eyes with the darkened windshield. My steps echoed on the pavement as I approached, each one fueled by a mix of fear and defiance. "Who are you?" I demanded, stopping a few feet away. No reply, just silence, as heavy as the night air. I circled the car, peering through the tinted glass, but it was useless. The windows reflected my own tense face back at me. No engine rumble, no breath fogging up the glass. It was as though the vehicle itself was a phantom, planted there just to torment me. When I touched the handle, the metallic chill of it sent a shiver up my spine. Locked. I yanked harder. Still locked. Finally, after minutes of standing in that standoff with a lifeless machine, I retreated to my house. My pulse was racing, sweat gathering on my temples. And that's when I noticed something I had overlooked in my earlier panic. A fresh envelope lay on my doorstep. It hadn't been there when I first came outside. Someone had placed it there while I was confronting the car. My hand trembled as I picked it up. This time the envelope was deep red, as if soaked in the hue of danger itself. Inside was a single card, with one line written in sharp black ink: "The shadow isn't outside." "It's inside." I froze, scanning the street again, the houses, the car. But the words weren't about them. They were about me. The sender was no longer playing with my external fears. They were digging deeper, prying open the cracks in my mind, whispering that the real threat was already under my skin. That night, sleep abandoned me. Every creak of the house became a warning. Every flicker of the shadows on the wall looked like a figure waiting to emerge, and every memory from my past, the choices, the betrayals, the enemies I'd made, came flooding back like ghosts demanding acknowledgement. Whoever was orchestrating this wanted me to question everything, not just my safety, not just my sanity, but the very foundation of who I was. And as the clock struck midnight, I realized something. That chilled me to the core. The real danger wasn't that I was being followed. It was that I might finally be forced to confront the part of myself I had spent decades burying. The shadow was here, and it knew my name. The night after the burned photograph arrived, I couldn't sleep. My house felt smaller, walls closing in as if secrets themselves were pressing against the plaster. The faint hum of the refrigerator sounded like a growl. Every creak of the wooden floorboards felt staged, like someone moving when I wasn't looking. I had lived here for decades, but that night it felt like unfamiliar territory, haunted not by ghosts but by intentions. I sat in the living room, lights off, gripping the same whiskey glass I'd been nursing for hours. My reflection in the darkened window looked older than I remembered, tired, frayed, like someone running out of time. I kept staring at the photograph, the one with half my face scorched away. Someone had wanted to erase me, to burn away my existence. Around 2 in the morning, just when exhaustion was pulling me under, I heard it, a knock. Not the polite kind. 3 sharp thuds that rattled the silence. My heart lurched. No one came to my house at this hour. Not anymore. I froze, glass still in hand. The knock came again, harder, more impatient. With deliberate slowness, I set the drink down and walked to the door. Each step measured, my bare feet pressing against the cold wood. I didn't turn on the porch light. Whoever stood there didn't deserve the courtesy of illumination. I hovered, my hand on the knob, before sliding the chain lock into place and cracking it open, just enough to see. What I saw made my stomach knot. A man stood on the porch, face hidden behind a plain black mask, the kind that looked handmade, stitched unevenly, almost grotesque. His clothes were nondescript, dark jacket, gloves, nothing traceable. He didn't speak. He just stood there, head tilted, like a predator studying prey. My voice came out rough, controlled. "What do you want?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, he slowly raised his hand. In it was a folded envelope, thick, sealed with dark wax. He slipped it through the gap in the door and stepped back into the shadows. Then, without a word, he turned and walked down the path, disappearing into the blackness of the trees that bordered my yard. I didn't chase him. I couldn't. My body was stiff with fear and curiosity in equal measure. My hands trembled as I shut the door, bolting it tight, heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted out. I stared at the envelope lying on the floor. It looked ordinary, but it radiated menace. Kneeling down, I picked it up and studied the wax seal, an imprint of something I didn't immediately recognize. A serpent curled around itself, devouring its own tail. The Ouroboros, a symbol of eternity, of cycles that never end. My mind spun. Who would send this, and why now, after so many years? I carried it to the dining table, laid it down carefully as though it might explode, and finally, with the slow precision of a surgeon, I broke the seal. Inside were several handwritten pages, the ink scrawled in a style I hadn't seen in decades. The handwriting was jagged, uneven, almost manic. The first line made my throat tighten. "You thought it was over, but sins don't rot in the ground." I kept reading, each sentence cut like glass. The writer recounted events from a time I had buried deep, a time when I was not the man people thought they knew. Every detail was exact, the names of places, the dates, the mistakes, the betrayals. Whoever had written this wasn't bluffing. They knew me, knew the things I had done, the people I had wronged. And then, at the bottom of the final page, one demand, on the anniversary of what you did: "You will confess, publicly, or I will. This is your only chance to choose how the story ends." I sat there, the words blurring in front of me. My mouth was dry, my pulse erratic. This wasn't just revenge. This was orchestration. Someone had been watching me, studying me, waiting for the right moment. I folded the letter and shoved it back into the envelope, locking it away in the desk drawer, but the damage was already done. My mind wouldn't let it rest. I couldn't decide which unsettled me more, the threat itself or the knowledge that I had earned it. Sleep didn't come. The hours dragged, every sound outside making me jump. By dawn, my paranoia had swollen into something alive. I needed answers. I couldn't just sit and wait for the next knock. That morning I drove into town, the streets quiet, early fog hanging low like smoke. Instead of going to the diner, I stopped at the library, a place no one would expect me to visit. I went straight to the archives, pulling out old local newspapers. I flipped through the brittle pages, looking for mentions of the things referenced in the letter. And there they were, tiny articles most people would skim past, but I remembered every detail: the people, the deals gone wrong, the accident that was no accident, and the death that had never been solved. Each headline stared back at me like an accusation, each photo a reminder that some wounds never close. My breath quickened as I realized the writer wasn't just bluffing. They were reconstructing the entire puzzle, piece by piece, with me at its rotten center. As I gathered the copies and shoved them into my jacket, I felt it, that weight of being watched. I looked up from the table and scanned the library. Ordinary people sat at computers, some flipping through books, others scribbling notes. But in the corner, half hidden behind a tall shelf, someone sat perfectly still. Dark jacket, masked face, head tilted, just like the figure on my porch. My blood froze. I didn't wait to confront him. I left the papers behind and bolted for the door. the squeal of my shoes on the tile echoing louder than my heartbeat. Outside, the town looked normal, cars driving past, people walking dogs, the kind of morning where nothing bad should happen. But I knew better. This was only the beginning. The past wasn't done with me yet. It was alive. And it had a face. The night after my unsettling discovery in the old cafe, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house felt louder, every shadow more sinister. My mind replayed the scene of that hidden photograph again and again. The smiling faces, the burned edges, and the faint handwriting on the back that said only, "Debt never dies." By dawn, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of untouched coffee, staring at that photograph like it was a riddle etched in fire. Who had hidden it? And why now, on my 68th birthday? I didn't have to wait long for another clue. Just as the sun began to rise, the doorbell rang. My heart pounded. Nobody came to my house unannounced, especially not this early. When I opened the door, there was no one. Only a small wooden box rested on the porch. I hesitated before picking it up. It was lighter than I expected, but something about it sent a chill through me. Inside was a single matchbox, old and stained, and a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it slowly, my hands trembling. The note read, "Burn the photograph. Only then will you understand." I sat there in silence, the words etched into my mind like a command from some unseen hand. My instinct screamed to throw the box away, to rid myself of this sinister game. But curiosity, and perhaps something deeper, something that felt like destiny, kept me from doing so. That night, I sat in my backyard, the photograph resting on a metal tray. The matchbox lay beside me, its contents rattling faintly. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow across the yard. I struck a match, and the flame hissed to life. For a moment, I hesitated, the tiny flame flickering like a question mark in the dark. Then I touched it to the corner of the photograph. The paper curled, blackening, as the fire consumed it. Smoke rose into the night air, carrying with it an acrid smell that stung my eyes. But then something unexpected happened. Within the flames, for just a heartbeat, I saw a shape. No, a face, a familiar one. The outline of a man, his eyes hollow, his expression filled with rage. I stumbled back, the photograph now nothing but ashes. My breath came in sharp gasps. It couldn't have been real. And yet, I knew what I had seen. As the ashes cooled, I noticed something strange. They hadn't scattered like normal ash. Instead, they clung together, forming lines, symbols, like some kind of code etched into the remnants. I leaned closer, my pulse racing. The shapes resolved into letters, an address. I whispered it out loud, my voice shaking. 13 Holloway Street. The name sent a jolt through me. That was an abandoned building at the edge of town, a place long avoided by locals. Rumors swirled about it. Illegal dealings, debts unpaid, people disappearing, and now it seemed to be the next step in this twisted path. The following day, I drove to Holloway Street. The building loomed before me, its windows boarded, graffiti covering its once grand facade. It looked like a place where memories went to rot, where secrets festered in the dark. I parked nearby and entered cautiously, the floorboards groaning under my weight. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and mildew. My flashlight cut a narrow path through the gloom, illuminating broken furniture, shattered glass, and walls scarred with old scorch marks. It felt like walking into the aftermath of a war, and then I saw it. At the far end of the room, on a cracked table, lay another box identical to the first. I approached slowly, every instinct on high alert. Inside this box was no matchbox. Instead, there was a charred ledger, its pages half destroyed by fire. I flipped through what remained. Names, numbers, dates, all entries of debts owed. But not debts of money. These were darker, written in cryptic shorthand, blood for silence. One life for another, payment collected. And there, scrawled across the last intact page, was my name. My knees nearly gave way. My name, written in ink, as if I were just another entry in some unholy account book. My debt, my place in this strange balance of vengeance and retribution. Before I could process it further, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing through the hollow space. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting across the dark, but I saw no one. The sound grew closer, then stopped. A voice whispered, low and gravelly, "You've lit the fire. Now the debt must be paid." My blood froze. I shone the light wildly in every direction, but the room was empty. The voice had come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I grabbed the ledger and fled the building, my breath ragged, my hands trembling around the charred book. When I finally reached the safety of my car, I looked back at the building. In one of the broken windows, I thought I saw movement, someone watching. Me, their silhouette barely distinguishable in the shadows. I drove home faster than I ever had, the ledger burning like a weight on the passenger seat. Once inside, I locked every door, every window, and sat at the table with the book open before me. My name glared back at me, a reminder that this wasn't over. The photograph had been the beginning. The flames had revealed the path. And now the ledger whispered of debts older than memory, debts that demanded payment. I realized with a sinking dread that whatever game I had stepped into, I wasn't just a player. I was the target, and the fire had only just begun. I woke the next morning to find the house unnaturally quiet. The air carried a stillness that almost hummed in my ears, the kind of silence that makes you feel watched. My first instinct was to check the door, then the windows, making sure everything was still locked. Nothing seemed disturbed. No broken latches, no signs of forced entry. But something in my gut twisted, insisting otherwise. When I stepped into the kitchen, that's when I saw it. On the counter, perfectly placed where I couldn't possibly miss it, lay a single envelope. Plain, white, unmarked, no stamp, no return address. My heart skipped, and I knew instantly. It hadn't been there the night before. Someone had entered my home while I slept. With trembling hands, I slid my finger under the seal and opened it. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, written in a sharp, deliberate hand. The message was short, but the words clawed at me like nails across glass. You think you can escape the past, but the past never forgets. The final piece will be revealed soon. Follow the trail or lose everything. There was no signature, no clue, just those chilling lines, but tucked inside the fold of the letter was something else, a torn fragment of a photograph. I unfolded it carefully. It was a picture of me, far younger, standing outside my old house. My wife was at my side, smiling, but the piece was jagged, ripped crudely from a larger photo. Whoever had left this had cut out the image of my wife's face. My chest tightened, and I felt sick. It wasn't just some random stalker. This was someone who knew. Someone who had access to things buried decades ago. Someone who wanted me to remember. I spent hours pacing the house, every nerve frayed. Why now? Why, after all these years of silence, was someone trying to drag me back into that darkness? I hadn't spoken of it to anyone. Not my wife, not my children, not even to the grave. I thought of the mysterious gift on my birthday, of the coded letter, of the shadows that seemed to lengthen around me with every step. This wasn't coincidence. It was deliberate, methodical, like a chess game where I was being forced into checkmate one move at a time. And the most disturbing part? Whoever this was, they were close. Close enough to slip into my house without waking me. Close enough to watch me without being seen. I picked up the phone, almost dialing the police. But what would I say? That someone left me a photo and a cryptic note? They would dismiss me as a paranoid old man losing his grip. They wouldn't understand the weight of what this meant. No, this was personal. This was mine to unravel. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Every shadow felt alive. I sat in the living room with a lamp on, the letter spread out on the table before me, reading, the words over and over again, searching for something hidden between the lines. Follow the trail. Trail to where? I thought about the photograph again. The background of the torn fragment showed my old neighborhood, the one I hadn't set foot in for decades. My stomach turned at the thought of returning there, but the message was clear. That was where I had to go. As the clock struck midnight, I made my decision. I couldn't let whoever was pulling the strings stay in control. I needed answers. The next morning, I drove back to that place I swore I'd never see again. The streets felt both familiar and alien, as if time had distorted them. The houses looked smaller, older, some abandoned. My own old house stood there like a relic, windows boarded up, paint peeling, its once bright face now scarred with neglect. And then, nailed to the front door, I saw it, another envelope. My pulse quickened as I approached. I tore it down and ripped it open right there on the porch. Inside was another note, scrawled in the same sharp handwriting. You're getting closer. The truth waits inside. I froze. Inside? I turned slowly toward the door, staring at the rusty lock and the boards covering the windows. My hands trembled as I reached for the doorknob. To my surprise, it turned. The door wasn't locked. Someone had prepared this for me. I pushed it open, and the smell of dust and decay hit me instantly. The air was heavy, suffocating. The rooms were dark, littered with broken furniture, fragments of old wallpaper peeling from the walls. My footsteps echoed too loudly, as though the house itself resented my return. In the living room, resting neatly on the cracked coffee table, was a small wooden box. Its presence was almost theatrical, as if deliberately staged. My heart hammered as I approached it. I lifted the lid slowly, the hinges groaning. Inside, wrapped in yellowed paper, was another photograph, this time whole. It showed a group of men, myself included, from decades ago. My breath caught. I hadn't seen this picture in years. We were all younger then, smiling, holding drinks, celebrating something that, at the time, felt triumphant. But the back of the photo was smeared with red ink, forming a single word: liar. The room spun. My throat tightened. Whoever was behind this knew everything. They weren't just dredging up the past. They were accusing me, condemning me. I dropped into a broken chair, clutching the photo with shaking hands. Suddenly, the silence of the house broke. From upstairs came the faint sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Someone else was here. I froze, every muscle locked. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The creaking steps grew louder, closer, until they reached the top of the staircase. And then, silence. Whoever it was had stopped, waiting, listening, just like me. The letter had told me the past never forgets. Now, sitting in my ruined old house, with a stranger lurking in the shadows above me, I finally understood what that meant. The silence of the manor had a weight to it that night, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. After the chaos of Evelyn's unexpected betrayal and the discovery of the hidden passage, beneath the cellar I had almost convinced myself that the storm had finally passed. Yet deep down, I knew better. Stories like mine don't grant their heroes peace so easily. There is always another shadow waiting in the corner, another unseen hand pulling the strings. I sat in my study, the firelight flickering over the spines of old books, tracing golden patterns across the walls. On the desk before me lay the journal, the cursed journal, half burned, its pages scarred but stubbornly intact. I had tried to destroy it countless times, but each attempt had failed. Water only smudged the ink temporarily before it bled back into clarity. Fire blackened the parchment, yet the words always reappeared. It was as if the book refused to die, clinging to existence with a hunger that matched my own need to uncover its truths. That night, as I sat staring at the cursed object, a strange sound broke through the stillness. A faint tap. Then another. My eyes flicked toward the tall windows, where the glass quivered under the heavy drizzle. At first, I thought it was only the rain, but the tapping grew sharper, more deliberate, like knuckles rapping softly against the pane. I froze. Someone was outside. Slowly, cautiously, I rose from my chair and crossed the room. My breath fogged the cold glass as I peered out into the garden. For a moment, I saw nothing but the distorted reflection of my own tired face, mingled with the shadows of trees swaying in the storm. But then, movement. A figure, tall, cloaked, standing just beyond the hedgerow, their head tilted upward, watching me. I stumbled back from the window, heart pounding against my ribs like a war drum. Who would come to me at this hour? Everyone I knew, everyone I trusted, was either gone, hiding, or too afraid to approach me now. That left only one possibility. Whoever stood outside was connected to the curse. The tapping came again, louder this time. This wasn't a plea for entry, it was a summons. Against my better judgment, I unlatched the window and pushed it open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of wet earth and something sharper, metallic, like rust or blood. The cloaked figure stepped forward into the dim light, and I saw the glint of a mask, bronze, tarnished, fashioned into the grotesque likeness of a snarling wolf. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice hoarse. The figure did not answer. Instead, they raised a hand and held up an object. My blood ran cold. It was the locket, the very same silver locket I had seen in Evelyn's trembling hand the night she betrayed me. The one she claimed had been passed down through her family, binding them to the journal. I had lost it in the chaos beneath the cellar when the passage collapsed. And yet, here it was, gleaming in the masked stranger's grasp. "You dropped this," the figure said at last, their voice low, distorted, as if filtered through some hidden mechanism. The tone was neither male nor female, but something eerily in between. "It belongs to you now." "I don't want it," I snapped, though my voice betrayed my fear. "Take it back to whoever sent you." The figure tilted their head, as though amused by my defiance. Then they stepped closer, pressing the locket against the window frame. "You cannot run from what has already chosen you. The journal is awake because of you. The locket is awake because of you. Whether you desire it or not, you are the last key." I felt the blood drain from my face. The last key to what? The figure leaned in, their mask nearly touching the glass. When they spoke again, their words chilled me to my very core. To the end of the story. Before I could react, the figure dropped the locket onto the sill. Then, with unnatural swiftness, they retreated into the storm. By the time I dared lean out the window, the garden was empty, the hedgerows whispering only with the wind. I slammed the window shut and locked it, though the gesture felt meaningless. My hands trembled as I picked up the locket. It was heavier than I remembered, its surface cold enough to sting my skin, and when I turned it over, I noticed something I had never seen before, an engraving, 3 words, carved crudely into the silver, "We are waiting." The phrase repeated itself in my mind again and again, until it drowned out even the crackle of the fire. Waiting for what? For me to die? For me to finish the journal's story? For something darker to awaken fully? I staggered back to my desk and dropped the locket onto the journal. The instant metal touched parchment, a spark hissed between them. I swore under my breath and yanked my hand away. The journal's cover shifted, as though breathing. The letters on its spine glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat, and then new words appeared on the once-burned page. "The visitor has come. The time has begun. 15 nights remain. 15 nights." That was all the time I had left, though for what I could not yet understand. The fire sputtered in the hearth, as though recoiling from the message. A chill settled over the room, heavier than any storm could bring. For the first time I wondered if survival was even possible anymore, or if. My fate had been sealed the moment I opened the cursed gift on my birthday. One thing, however, was certain. Whatever game I had been forced into, the rules had just changed, and the masked visitor was only the beginning. The narrow passage seemed endless, twisting downward like the throat of some ancient beast. Each step echoed in the hollow silence, bouncing back as though unseen ears were listening. My lantern light danced on the damp stone walls, revealing etchings, symbols, carved with precision, patterns that mirrored the ones on the chest. My pulse quickened. I realized this was no ordinary cellar. This was a labyrinth, a carefully constructed maze designed to test, to protect, or to trap. I placed my hand against the wall. The stone was cold, but beneath the chill was something else, a faint vibration, as if the very bones of the earth hummed with buried secrets. I swallowed hard, recalling my father's voice from years ago. "Some doors aren't meant to be opened, son." Yet here I was, prying open not just a door, but the heart of a mystery that spanned generations. The deeper I went, the more oppressive the air became. A smell lingered, metallic and sharp, like rust mixed with damp soil. My lantern sputtered briefly, casting the corridor into fleeting darkness before catching again. My throat tightened at the thought of what would happen if the flame died. Alone in silence, swallowed by a maze no one knew existed, it would be the perfect tomb. I reached a fork, 3 tunnels, each leading into darkness. No signs, no markers, nothing but the steady whisper of air from unseen chambers. My mind raced. Which one? I thought of the chest's carvings, the shapes that repeated like a puzzle. Triangle, circle, line. My eyes scanned the walls and found it. Faint, almost invisible under. The grime was a circle carved into the stone of the leftmost tunnel. A clue or a trap. I chose it. The air grew heavier, pressing against my chest with each breath. As I walked, the sound of dripping water grew louder, echoing like a heartbeat. I turned a corner and nearly stumbled over a pile of stones. But they weren't random rubble. They were stacked carefully, like a marker. Beside it lay a scrap of paper, yellowed and torn. My lantern's light revealed a single sentence written in jagged script. "Trust no one, not even the ones who sent you here." I froze. My mouth went dry. Who had left this? Who else had walked these halls? My instinct screamed at me to turn back, but another part of me, the same, Stubbornness that had pulled me into this labyrinth pushed me forward. The tunnel widened into a chamber. My lantern illuminated vast walls covered in murals, ancient scenes of people bowing. Before an object, something that looked strikingly like the chest I now carried. Their faces were etched with awe and terror. A ritual? A curse? My skin prickled as I stepped closer. One mural showed the chest being locked away underground, guarded by hooded figures whose eyes glowed with fire. Another showed those who dared to open it, writhing in agony, their forms twisted, as if their very souls were being devoured. I staggered back, nearly dropping the lantern. My father's gift. This was what he left me? A legacy of horror? The chamber's floor was different here. Smooth stone with grooves running in patterns. I crouched down and brushed away centuries of dust. A puzzle. The grooves matched the carvings on the chest. My hands trembled as I aligned the symbols, my mind screaming at me to stop. And then, click, the floor shuddered. Stone ground against stone as a hidden panel slid open in the wall. Beyond it lay a staircase spiraling downward, swallowed in pitch black. A sound rose from the dark. Not footsteps, not wind. A low hum, rhythmic, almost mechanical. My lantern shook in my grip. I should have turned back. I should have sealed the panel and walked away, but I was already too far gone. I descended. Each step felt like crossing a threshold into another world. The humming grew louder, joined by faint whispers that seemed to seep through the stone. At the bottom, the passage opened into a cavernous hall unlike anything I had ever seen. Giant stone pillars stretched to a ceiling lost in shadow, carved with more of those infernal symbols. And at the center of the hall, upon a raised dais, sat an object shrouded in cloth. I staggered closer, my breath loud in the oppressive silence. With trembling hands, I pulled the cloth away. What lay beneath made my blood run cold. It wasn't another chest. It was a mirror, tall, framed in obsidian black. The glass shimmered as though alive, rippling like liquid under unseen hands. My reflection stared back, only it wasn't quite me. Its eyes were wrong, too sharp, too aware. Its mouth curved into a smile I wasn't making. Then it spoke. "You've come far, Michael." Just like he did. The voice was my own, yet layered with something deeper, something inhuman. My knees weakened, my lantern flickered. The reflection tilted its head, studying me like prey. "Do you want to know the truth?" it asked. "The truth your father died to protect?" The cavern seemed to close in around me, suffocating, pulling me toward the mirror. My instincts screamed to run, but my body wouldn't move. I realized with a clarity that chilled me to the core that this was no mere reflection. This was the heart of the labyrinth. This was what the chest was guarding. And it was awake. By the time I returned home, the city felt different, quieter, colder, as though it too had sensed the shift in my story. I closed the front door behind me, locked it twice, and sank into my armchair. My body was exhausted, but my mind was running a marathon with no finish line. Every discovery had been another thread in a web, and now the web was nearly complete. I could see the shape of it, but the center, the spider itself, remained unseen. On the coffee table lay the small wooden box, the one that had started everything on my 68th birthday. I hadn't touched it in days, almost afraid of it, as if it contained a curse. But now, with the truth creeping closer, I felt compelled to open it again. The hinges groaned as I lifted the lid. Inside was the same folded letter, the same strange key, and the same faint smell of old paper and dust. Yet somehow, tonight, it felt heavier, like it knew I was finally prepared to hear its secrets. I reread the letter. The words had been burned into my memory by now, but I noticed something I hadn't before. The handwriting, elegant and deliberate, leaned slightly to the left. My father's letters had always leaned right. My mother's, too. But there was someone else whose writing I remembered vividly, someone who had always written their name at the top of school essays with that leftward slant. My brother. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. My brother, the sibling I had buried decades ago in my mind as a victim of bad luck and poor choices, was connected to all of this. But how? He had been gone for years, hadn't he? The obituaries, the funeral, or had those two been a performance in this long, drawn-out play? I dropped the letter back into the box and stood up, pacing the room. If my brother was alive, he had either become my ally or my enemy. And if he was behind this gift, it meant he had been watching me for decades, waiting until the precise moment to strike or to reveal. The phone rang. Its shrill cry pierced the silence, freezing me in place. Slowly I picked it up. The line crackled, and then a low, familiar voice said, "You're closer than you think." My blood turned to ice. "Who is this?" I demanded, though deep down I already knew. The voice chuckled softly, almost mockingly. "Don't you recognize me? After all this time, after everything we've shared, you still hesitate." It was him, my brother, alive, speaking to me through the telephone like some phantom from the past. My knees buckled, and I had to grip the table to stay standing. "You're supposed to be dead," I whispered. "Supposed to be," he replied. "That's the beauty of deception. Everyone believed what they were meant to believe. But I've been here all along, pulling strings, watching, waiting." My thoughts spiraled. Why now? Why after so many years? "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "What I've always wanted," he said calmly. "The truth. And for you to see it. Everything you've built, every success, every moment of peace. It's been on borrowed time. Our family story isn't finished, not until you face the real reason I disappeared." The line went dead. I stood in the silence, the phone still pressed to my ear, my heart pounding like a war drum. He was alive. He had been alive all this time, and he wanted me to follow him into the darkness he had carved out for himself. Sleep was impossible that night. I sat awake until dawn, replaying his voice in my mind, analyzing every word, every inflection. His tone hadn't been angry. It had been controlled, patient, almost theatrical. Whatever game he was playing, it was reaching its climax. The next morning, a letter slipped under my front door. No envelope, just a folded sheet of paper. Inside was a simple message written in that same slanted handwriting: "Meet me where it all began." My childhood home. The place had been abandoned for years, its windows boarded, its roof sagging with rot. I hadn't set foot inside since the day we buried our parents. Now, my brother wanted me to return there. I knew it was a trap. Every instinct screamed that this was the final act, the last curtain call, where either the truth would be revealed or I would be destroyed. But I couldn't refuse. This was no longer about curiosity. It was about survival. The journey back was like driving into a ghost story. The streets I once knew were cracked and overgrown, the houses sagging relics of forgotten lives. When I reached the old family home, I almost didn't recognize it. The paint had peeled away to gray splinters. Ivy strangled the brick walls, and the porch creaked under my weight like it might collapse at any moment. The door was unlocked. Inside, the house smelled of mold and dust, but also something sharper, something metallic, like rust or old blood. The furniture was covered in sheets, ghosts of the past draped in white. As I walked deeper, every step echoed in the hollow silence. Memories flooded back, childhood laughter in the kitchen, arguments in the living room, tears on the staircase. But beneath those memories was a darker current, a reminder that this house had never truly been safe. And then I heard it, a slow clap. From the shadows, a figure emerged. His hair was grayer, his face marked by years of hardship, but his eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, were unmistakable. My brother. "Well," he said with a wry smile, "you made it. I wasn't sure you still had the courage." I froze. 1,000 questions fought for space in my throat, but none escaped. He stepped closer, his movements confident, rehearsed, as if he had played this scene in his mind countless times. "This house," he continued, gesturing around us, "is where everything began. The lies, the betrayals, the secrets buried under years of silence. And now, it's where everything ends." My pulse raced. "What do you mean, ends?" He tilted his head, his smile widening. "Oh, brother, don't you see? This is the final act, the conclusion to our family's story. And you're not going to like the role I've written for you." The walls seemed to close in around me. This was it, the showdown I had unknowingly been preparing for all my life. But the true horror was only beginning to reveal itself. The city outside lay cloaked in shadows, the wind howling through the broken alleys like some restless spirit. I sat in my study, the fire flickering low, its flames carving shapes on the walls. In front of me, a thick folder lay open, its contents spread across the desk. Photographs, letters, deeds, contracts, all the pieces of a puzzle I had spent years assembling. The truth was finally complete, every thread connected. And yet, staring at it, I felt an odd sense of emptiness, as if the victory I had long pursued had already slipped through my fingers. The gift from my 68th birthday had set me on this path, and with each step I had uncovered layers of deception woven so carefully that they had fooled not only the world but even those closest to me. Betrayal, I had learned, was not an act of violence. It was a slow poison, dripping silently until the heart itself no longer trusted its own beat. Tonight, however, the poison had a name, a face, and I was ready to confront it. The folder contained one final document, a confession, not written by me, but by the very hand of the man I had once called my closest confidant. When I first found it, tucked inside a safety deposit box hidden under layers of false identities, I thought it was a forgery. But the handwriting was unmistakable, the trembling strokes of a guilty conscience finally caving under its own weight. His words, scrawled across the pages, were not an apology. They were a defense, an attempt to justify the unforgivable. He spoke of choices, of debts, of desperate bargains made in the dark. He claimed betrayal was the only way to survive. Reading those words ignited a storm inside me. For decades I had believed myself a victim of chance, a casualty of ruthless ambition. But the confession revealed something far worse. Everything had been orchestrated, planned with precision, and executed by someone I had trusted more than family. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling as the crackle of the fire faded into silence. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from rage held back for too long. This wasn't just about vengeance anymore. This was about closure, about ensuring that the poison never seeped into another life again. The phone rang, shattering the silence. Its sharp tone echoed through the room like a gunshot. I hesitated for a moment before picking it up. "It's time," a voice said, calm and deliberate. I knew that voice. It belonged to her, the woman who had appeared like a ghost, guiding me through fragments of the truth, always just out of reach. I never knew whether she was ally or enemy, but her presence had been constant, her whispers leading me through the labyrinth. "Where?" I asked. "Where it all began," she replied before the line went dead. The words lingered in the air, heavy and unshakable. Where it all began. That could only mean one place, the old estate, the house where the first seeds of betrayal had been planted all those years ago. My heart pounded as memories rushed back, laughter in the hallways, toasts raised in celebration, promises made under chandeliers, and beneath it all, lies woven with precision. I closed the folder, slid it into a leather satchel, and rose to my feet. The room seemed colder now, the fire nearly extinguished, as if the house itself knew this chapter was nearing its end. I paused by the mirror, staring at my reflection. The man looking back at me was not the same one who had unwrapped that mysterious gift years ago. He was harder now, scarred by truth, shaped by betrayal. And yet, behind the lines etched into my face, there was something fierce, something unbroken. The drive to the estate was a blur. The city lights flickered past, neon blending with darkness, until eventually the road narrowed, winding through the countryside where time seemed to stand still. When the gates of the estate came into view, rusted and overgrown, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The place had been abandoned for decades, yet tonight it was alive with shadows. I pushed the gates open and walked through the overgrown path, each step echoing with ghosts of the past. The house loomed ahead, its windows shattered, its walls crumbling, but its presence still suffocating. Inside, the air smelled of dust and decay, but also of something else. Anticipation, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. And there he was. Seated in the center of the grand hall, a single lantern illuminating his face, sat the man from the confession. Older now, frailer but unmistakable. His eyes met mine, and for a moment silence stretched between us, heavy and unyielding. Then he spoke. "You finally made it." His voice was steady, almost relieved, as if he had been waiting for this night as much as I had. "I read your words," I said, my voice cutting through the room. "You betrayed everything we built. You betrayed me." He sighed, his shoulders slumping under the weight of years. "I did what I had to. You don't understand the choices I faced. If I hadn't—" "Don't!" I snapped, slamming the satchel onto the table. The sound echoed like thunder. "Don't you dare paint betrayal as sacrifice. You had a choice, and you chose yourself." His eyes darkened, but there was no malice, only resignation. "And you chose revenge." The words hit harder than I expected. He was right. Every step I had taken since that birthday had been fueled by vengeance. by the desire to expose, to punish, to destroy. And yet, standing there, I felt the weight of it pressing down on me. Revenge had consumed me, shaped me. But now, with him in front of me, I wondered if the fire had burned too long. The lantern flickered, casting shifting shadows across his face. For the first time, I saw not the betrayer, but the broken man beneath. The years of guilt, the hollow justifications, the fear etched into every wrinkle. And I realized something. The truth was already his punishment. I leaned forward, my voice a whisper. This is your confession, your curse, your legacy. The world will know what you did. They will remember you not for the man you pretended to be, but for the coward you were. His hands trembled as he lowered his gaze. The silence between us was deafening, but in it I felt something shift. A release, a loosening of the chains that had bound me for so long. For the first time in years, I felt free. The mansion stood silent, the kind of silence that pressed against the skin like static before a storm. I had spent the entire night moving through shadows, setting every piece of the final act into place. By dawn, all that remained was to watch the curtain fall. They had gathered in the grand dining hall, those who had once looked down on me dismissed, me stolen from me, and laughed at the idea that an old man could ever strike back. I saw them through the gap in the heavy oak doors. Some were already uneasy, sensing that this wasn't a gathering of celebration but of judgment. Their eyes darted to one another, questions whispering in silence. None of them realized that their every step had already been decided. I walked in slowly, cane tapping against the polished marble floor, each step echoing with finality. Their chatter died the instant they saw me. Fear rippled through the room, not because of what I carried, but because of the expression on my face, calm, controlled, absolute. On my 68th birthday, I said, voice carrying like a sermon, I was given a gift, a reminder that the past never forgets. Tonight you will understand what that means. I placed the box, the same one I had received weeks earlier, on the center of the table. It sat there like a heart torn from its chest, pulsing with unseen weight. Every eye was locked on it. Some shifted in their seats, some swallowed hard, others clenched fists as if they could still fight their way out. But they were already trapped. One of them, bolder than the rest, tried to stand. My gaze stopped him cold. Sit, I commanded. He did, trembling as though invisible chains dragged him back down. The box creaked as I lifted the lid. Instead of jewels or weapons, there were documents, every crime, every betrayal, every secret meticulously collected over decades. Evidence that could ruin them, destroy their empires, rip apart their carefully constructed facades. Gasps filled the air as they recognized their own handwriting, signatures, photographs, their sins laid bare in front of them. This isn't about death, I said, my tone sharp as steel. This is about erasure. You wanted me forgotten. Tonight, it is you who will vanish. Screens flickered to life along the walls, one by one, revealing live feeds of their homes, their offices, their bank accounts already frozen. Panic surged through the hall as realization hit. Everything they had built was collapsing, systematically dismantled by the very man they thought powerless. Screams erupted, accusations flew, but none of it mattered. Their world was already burning. One woman begged for mercy, tears streaming down her face. Another cursed me, spitting venom that only confirmed the truth of her guilt. A few tried to bargain, offering money, alliances, promises they could no longer keep. I listened to none of it. I had waited too long for this moment, and mercy had no seat at this table. Finally, as the chaos reached its peak, I raised my hand. The room went still. My final words cut through the tension like a blade. You took everything from me. Tonight, I take everything from you. The past always collects its debt. With a subtle motion, I triggered the last mechanism. The lights went out, plunging the hall into pitch blackness. Gasps, footsteps, the sound of chairs scraping across the floor filled the void. When the lights returned, the table was empty. The box remained, silent and closed, like a coffin after the burial. I walked away, cane tapping rhythmically, leaving behind nothing but echoes. The mansion, once a monument to their arrogance, was now nothing more than a tomb of memories. As I stepped into the morning light, the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon. For the first time in decades, I felt the weight lift from my chest. The revenge was complete. The past had been answered, and in that silence I finally found peace. But peace is a fragile thing, and somewhere in the distance I could already feel new eyes watching me, waiting, plotting, Perhaps revenge is never truly finished. It simply changes hands. The story wasn't over. It never is.